Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 2 Remake, Hardcore difficulty, Leon 1 scenario, no damage, knife only, S+ walkthrough, and this is the sewers area. And I'm gonna apologize for the delay in getting this video out, it's just I've been busy with some things, but now I'm back, so I can actually get this video out, so that you guys can actually enjoy my walkthrough. But there's not much to really say about the sewers area for Leon's campaign. It works exactly the same as the sewers area for Claire's campaign. And I'm not going to waste time just restating strategies I've already stated in my Claire 1 scenario run. If you want to hear my strategies for the sewers area, just watch my Claire 1 video. I mean, I will occasionally commentate on what's happening, but I think I'll just go off on different tangents. I'll just talk about Hideki Kamiya, I'll talk about Resident Evil 3, I'll talk about Resident Evil 8, because apparently there have been some leaks from Resident Evil 8. They're not valid leaks, there is a lot of weird stuff that the leaks presented for Resident Evil 8, but there were some interesting details to really discuss, and I'll discuss them for you. So, in these leaks for Resident Evil 8, there are a couple of aspects that might potentially disappoint you if you didn't like Resident Evil 7, but it's obviously going to be exciting for me, because I loved Resident Evil 7. Apparently, Resident Evil 8 is going to be in the first-person perspective, and that's already causing a lot of people to express a lot of hate, because they're like, oh, it's not part of the Resident Evil series, it's just not the major thing that defines a Resident Evil game. But you can't make that argument at all. Do you know the amount of people that hated the idea of an over-the-shoulder perspective when they were so used to the fixed camera angle from the other Resident Evil games? How can you present the exact same argument again? Shut the hell up and just accept the camera perspective. First-person view is not a bad camera perspective. In fact, it really benefited Resident Evil 7's take on the series. It made you feel more connected to the world, and I especially liked getting a close-up view to everything in the environment, and I especially liked watching Ethan's hands as he was doing that healing animation. Resident Evil 7 definitely has my favorite healing animation out of all the Resident Evil games, because watching Ethan douse his hand with that first aid med was so satisfying to watch the first time I saw that animation. I must have restarted that video so many times. And not only that, but the first-person perspective allowed Capcom to experiment a lot more with the enemy behavior, with how to hide them, and with how to make them a lot more threatening, and then also with changing up certain gameplay features for Ethan Winters. The first-person view was quite a risk, but it really paid off in the end for Capcom. And speaking of Ethan Winters is apparently returning in this game, which is another reason why I'm so excited, because I absolutely loved Ethan Winters. A lot of people say he's a boring character, but come on! It's not like the older Resident Evil characters had any special characteristics in their first games. They were pretty bland, and lacked any real emotion, and oftentimes they did some very dumb things. Then in the later games, people loved them! The fact that they won't give Ethan Winters a chance is just a great example of hypocritical behavior. And having him come back makes logical sense with his first-hand experience with BOWs. Heck, he knows how to fight BOWs his first time, better than the other Resident Evil characters their first time fighting BOWs. And it's so bizarre because the older Resident Evil characters have special tactics and training, with like military services, with police services, yet Ethan Winters had absolutely no combat experience. If you've not seen my walkthrough of Resident Evil 7, you need to check it out. You need to understand why Ethan Winters is so much more capable at fighting BOWs his first time compared to the older Resident Evil characters. Because it's so noticeable. But the next point that the leak addresses is that the game will apparently center around Evelyn's origins, which is yet again another reason why Ethan Winters coming back makes so much sense. Because Evelyn made it personal for Ethan in Resident Evil 7 when she decided to kidnap Ethan's wife. And What Culture Gaming said the same thing in their analysis of the leaks. They said that this is personal for him in their analysis. It makes so much sense for Ethan to come back to take on Evelyn, and once again, he has had more experience with Evelyn than any other character. The next point that the leak discusses is that there is apparently a wolf-like enemy that will appear in Resident Evil 8. I mean, again, this is not a valid leak, but I can't really say much about the idea of a wolf-like enemy. Don't think of it as a werewolf, it's just a wolf-like enemy. I don't know why people have assumed it means a werewolf, because that's just really dumb. But I don't care what Capcom does, so long as the enemy type is actually well-designed and well-balanced and actually doesn't feign lethality. In fact, the whole idea of a wolf-like enemy is very interesting, because originally, in Resident Evil 7's development, Capcom wanted to give the Baker family a family dog that would chase you throughout the house, but it didn't get into the game. So this might be a continuation of that if they decide to bring it into Resident Evil 8, and that'll be very interesting to see what it's going to be like. The leak does discuss several different enemy types that might appear in Resident Evil 8, but one of the enemy types that might be appearing is a female ghost-like figure that can attack Ethan. And this is actually interesting because Resident Evil 3.5, this was an unreleased version of Resident Evil 4, it tried to come up with this whole idea of a ghost that would appear because Leon was infected by a particular virus, and it would attack him. But the whole idea of these hallucination sequences was completely scrapped in Resident Evil 4, so they might be bringing it back in Resident Evil 8. And it makes sense for this design choice to be apparent because Resident Evil 7 did try to add a bit of psychological horror to the biological horror that Resident Evil is known for. I mean, it was very simple in Resident Evil 7, but it seems like they're going to make it a little bit more complex with Resident Evil 8. So it'll be interesting to see how that is going to turn out. I mean, again, this isn't a valid leak, so I can't guarantee that this is actually going to be the case. But what might be a valid leak is the return of zombies. And zombies, of course, are a big thing in the Resident Evil series. Everybody loves them. I mean, I hope that the zombies are not like Resident Evil 2 Remake zombies. Because the zombies in Resident Evil 2 Remake are honestly the worst zombie enemy ever. I hate them. They are really trash. They cheat all the time. They take advantage of the kind of vulnerabilities that you have because of how crap the mechanics are in this game. And if Resident Evil 8 is going to be anything like Resident Evil 7, then most likely it is going to embrace lethal but fair designs. So, if zombies are returning, I hope they embrace Resident Evil 7 mentalities rather than Resident Evil 2 Remake mentalities. And speaking of something familiar returning, Chris Redfield is apparently returning to this game. And that makes sense, because, I mean, he was in another Hero DLC for Resident Evil 7. He's with Blue Umbrella. Blue Umbrella has to return somehow. You know, they're a big part of Resident Evil 7. And Chris Redfield is a part of the Blue Umbrella. Or, I mean, he's part of the BSAA, but he was working alongside Blue Umbrella. But it makes total sense for him to return in Resident Evil 8. You know, we got introduced to Blue Umbrella. We have to see what they're going to do for this game. And then on the topic of locations, the leak specified a village and a castle. And then it's all going to be surrounded by snowy mountaintops. So apparently we're going to someplace snowy and the winter's going to be the primary season. This might not be true. It just sounds very odd for Ethan Winters to go to a location like this, because he's more used to modern structures. But if it is, I don't really care so long as the locations are going to be interesting. I mean, the Baker household from Resident Evil 7, one of my favorite locations in the Resident Evil game. The amount of detail they put into the environments, and the amount of life they provided to such a dead area, it was so memorable. The different locations you went to in the Baker household, every single location had its own character, and it really showcased who was the leader at these particular locations, who was the big cheese of these locations. I mean, you had the main Baker household, which was Jack, you had the old house, which was Marguerite, and you had the farm area, which was Lucas. Resident Evil 7 did a fantastic job with its environments, and if the environments are going to be as interesting in Resident Evil 8, I'm going to be so happy. And the next thing that the leak specified is that it might not be called Resident Evil 8. It sounds more like a spin-off title. That's what the leak specified. I mean, we all know the history of the spin-off titles in Resident Evil. They haven't always been the best. I mean, there have been some good ones like Resident Evil Dead Aim, but then there have been some trash ones like Operation Raccoon City. So it's definitely understandable why people might be having doubts about the whole idea of a spin-off Resident Evil title. But based on the leaks I've already presented, I don't care. If these leaks are true, then I might finally feel hyped for a Resident Evil game after so long. Because Resident Evil 2 Remake was such a disappointment. Resident Evil 3 Remake, if it's going to be anything like Resident Evil 2 Remake, then it might not be as good. But these leaks are promising for Resident Evil 8. I'm so happy. Oh, by the way, right there, G2 Birkin didn't do his attack earlier. He decided to do it at that particular point. And I actually learned that you get iframes during that animation, not as you're dropping down, but the moment you start the animation. Another good thing is that G2 Birkin will not actually get to you very quickly. You have plenty of time to move the crane out of the way and still do the strategy you're going to be seeing me doing right here. And it's probably best I go into detail about what I'm doing here. But all I'm doing is waiting for G2 Birkin to do an attack animation that gives him a lot of recovery, such as his 3-hit combo, and then during his recovery frames, at a very particular point, I'm going to hit the button, and that will cause him to do that attack you just saw him do. And because of how fair the attack is, I'm going to be able to run past him, and he will get hit by the crane. After he gets hit by the crane, I always go behind him to waste his time, and to make him do this path you're about to see right here, I always stand in that spot just then, so that he's quite a distance away from me. And all I'm going to do is just use the sprint counter once again to get him to do an animation that gives him a lot of recovery. I just need to wait for the button to be ready, which it is. And this is a bad spot right here because I'm really close to him, but I know that he is going to do the jump attack eventually, so I can just get past him. And I actually learned that you can actually use the sprint counter on G2 Birkin when he's facing you at an angle. So while he's turning, if you run towards him just as his head is looking at you, you can initiate the sprint counter. I think I'll upload a separate video because I tried testing this and it worked out really well, so I might have found another way to update my current strategy. But he's been hit by the crane again, and now I'm just going to repeat my strategy. I'm going to get behind him, he's going to waste a turn, and then I'm going to stand over here to influence his pathing, which he's doing right now. And then in the last phase, he's going to do a 5-hit combo. And this 5-hit combo is pretty dangerous because you cannot get away from him unless you space him. And that right there is not damage, that's just the flinch animation. But the button is ready now, and I'm going to try to get over to where the button is, but right now he's not registering the sprint counter because he's not directly walking towards me and he's not directly looking at me. If he's not doing either of those things, then he doesn't register the sprint counter, but right there he was, and he's doing the 5-hit combo, which is what I need, and yeah, all I gotta do is just run over to this side right here. He's gonna do the really fair attack, and I'm just going to run right past him. And that is the end of G2 Birkin. And as I've already said before, in Claire 1, he's one of my favorite bosses in this game. He's so much better than G3 Birkin. You know, that's another thing as well I hope for Resident Evil 8. I hope the bosses are not going to be trash, like some of Resident Evil 2 Remake's bosses. Resident Evil 2 Remake's bosses are pretty simplistic in design, and I mean, not like G2 Birkin. I mean, G2 Birkin I can understand as having a simplistic design because the fight is very short. But with that simplistic design, at least he's an interesting fight, because it doesn't drag out for such a long time compared to G3 Birkin. G3 Birkin lasts way too long.
Where'd you get that?
And I wonder what type of bosses we might be fighting in Resident Evil 8. Of course, that's assuming if Resident Evil 8 ever comes out, because apparently Resident Evil 8 was scrapped for development, because Capcom was trying to focus on Resident Evil 7's DLCs and also on Resident Evil 2 Remake. And apparently they just started development of Resident Evil 8 like 6 months ago, and I'm sure you can easily tell 6 months is not enough of a head start to get started on a game. If this game was in development from the beginning of Resident Evil 6 probably, then it would actually make a lot more sense for Resident Evil 8 to come out very soon. But since it's gotten started like 6 months ago, I don't think we'll be seeing Resident Evil 8 for a while. This is what the leak says. And apparently we won't be seeing a lot of remakes of Resident Evil games for a while. That's also what the leak said, which is kind of disappointing because I'd really like to see Resident Evil Code Veronica get remade, because Resident Evil Code Veronica is one of my favorite Resident Evil games, and I am planning a walkthrough of Resident Evil Code Veronica. It'll be a no damage walkthrough. It'll be just that, because in order to get the A rank, and A rank is the maximum rank on the US version, you have to not save. And since I'm going to be doing it in walkthrough format, I have to make saves so I can separate out the individual sections, because I need to make sure I maintain a consistent strategy for each of the individual sections. That's how you design a walkthrough. But we're coming up on the end of this video right now, so I'll go into a lot more detail about the tangents I've just discussed in the next video. So stay tuned for the final part of Leon 1. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.
Okay. I wonder where the G-Bot...